Hello everybody, my name is Matt the Lawyer, Matt Johnston, and this video is going to be, well, the purpose of it is to be quite time sensitive, but it is also geared a little bit more towards Maryland employers. If you happen to be a client of ours who's not in Maryland, give us a call, we'll talk about the situation in your state. If you happen to be not a client of ours, why not? Anyhow, this video is about the coronavirus, COVID-19, and more specifically about the things that are happening here in the state of Maryland and how Governor Hogan's recent announcements today will affect how small business employers are going to be working. So today at about 4:30, just to recap, Governor Hogan issued an extraordinary set of actions, if not absolutely unprecedented. Among those actions were he's raised the level of emergency situation for the state. He has banned the entry of cruise ships into the Port of Baltimore. But most significantly, he has banned and ordered that any event with more than 250 people to be canceled, which is pretty extraordinary. So that includes public and private events. So venues would not be permitted to hold events, and the hosts of those events would not be permitted to conduct the event. So 250 events. The state school superintendent has ordered schools closed here in Maryland. Starting on Monday, they'll be closed for 2 weeks. Most of the universities in the state have closed or will be closing either now or shortly after spring breaks, which are starting to happen as we speak. So students will not be permitted to back on campus. Some of them will have to move out. But what I'm really here to talk about is what is going to be the impact on small business employers here in the state of Maryland. So let's get a few things out of the way first. This is an evolving situation, so things could change. Today is March 12th. And it's a little after 11 o'clock p.m. as I'm recording this, so it is quite possible that by 11 o'clock p.m. on Friday the 13th, a lot of this information could be changed, but most of it's probably going to be pretty steady. So not long after Governor Hogan made his announcement, my email started to blow up with all kinds of questions about what can I do, what should I do, what do I have to do. So let's start with some basic questions that were coming in. Some of the first questions are, does this mean I have to close my business? The answer is no, you do not have to close your business. You may be limited in what you can do if you are an event production company, for example, or if you are hosting a conference, but you do not have to close your business. You can continue to operate day to day. Now, what does that mean? That generally means that you should still be taking precautions. You should still be thinking about what you should do in terms of an emergency management plan should a directive from the governor come down to close public spaces, for example, stores or gyms or something like that. But for right now, these facilities are permitted to be open. So then comes the questions of how do I work with my employees? And that's a really, really good question. So one of the first questions is, can I force my employees to telework if it's possible? And the answer is yes. You can require employees who can to go ahead and telework. In fact, considering that the schools are going to be closed for the next couple of weeks, you're probably going to get a lot of requests tomorrow on Friday the 13th to telework from home. And I encourage employers to be as flexible as you can with that. If you're wondering how you're going to maintain productivity, well, I've got an answer for that. My good friend Amanda Hadaway is going to be hosting a webinar on this very topic, dealing with productivity when teleworking during the coronavirus emergency. I will put the link to her webinar down below in the comments or in the show notes for this particular post. So, if you're requiring folks to telework, what about those folks who cannot telework? That's a good question. So, the Maryland Department of Health, the CDC, OSHA, the U.S. Department of Labor are all calling things like you want to sort of minimize social interaction or um, or close proximity with employees. So this is where employers may have to start getting creative. If you happen to be a sort of a typical 9 to 5 office or 8 to 6 office or something like that, you may want to think about staggering some of your employees' work time. So you have some employees come in early and some employees come in late. Minimize the overlap, minimize the number of people who are working in the office at any one time. And that may be able to reduce the number of employees, reduce the social interaction, and sort of help reduce the spread of the coronavirus. Um, it also may have the secondary benefit of those of your employees who have kids at home. Maybe you can figure out some way so they can stagger childcare, because that's going to be a bit of a challenge as well. So for those employees, you do have to do that. But what if you can't do that? What if you can't have your employees staggered and you have to have employees stay at home? The question that we're getting is, do I have to pay my employees if I require them to be at home? So the answer to that question is, well, let's do the legal part first. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is the federal law, and under Maryland law, non-exempt employees, these are typically your hourly employees, they typically get paid for the hours that they work. If they're not working any hours, technically you don't have to pay them. Exempt employees, if they work at least some part of a work week, are required to be paid for the entire work week. So if they work part of a week, maybe just one day even, that's enough to trigger them getting paid for the entire work week. Now, obviously, there's a distinction there. Some employees are going to get paid and some employees would not. So how do you handle that? You can, if you are eligible, if you're an eligible employer or a covered employer that you have paid sick and safe leave under Maryland law, you can allow your employees to take their paid sick and safe leave. You could, of course, voluntarily pay your employees. That's always a possibility. And if you are a smaller employer with 14 or fewer employees, your employees are eligible for unpaid sick leave, so it doesn't really help them. So this is kind of a moral question, and it's a moral question for which I don't have a great answer. I understand that if a business has to close or chooses to close, you're choosing to forego income that would typically be necessary to pay your staff. This is a question that each individual employer is going to have to answer. I'm happy to have a discussion with any clients or potential clients who are interested in having that discussion, but it is one of those questions. So what about conduct of employees? If you're going to maintain open, what are some of the questions that an employer can ask? Well, as most people know, the president has ordered a ban on travel by foreign nationals coming back into the United States from China, Iran, most of Europe, and I'm sure that list is going to grow over time. That ban does not apply to U.S. citizens returning back to the United States or resident aliens, those folks who own or hold a green card. So those folks will be permitted back into the States. An employer can ask their employees if they have traveled to or from those countries on the CDC list or on the travel ban list. You can ask that question. You can also ask the question if your employees have been in contact with somebody who has traveled to those regions in the past couple months. Here's a hint. To avoid issues of discrimination, please, 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 just ask everybody. This is not a good time to start picking and choosing. This is not a good time for having different treatment of employees. You can ask all employees if they have traveled. You cannot prohibit travel on a personal basis of those employees. So if they choose to go overseas and they come back, You can say you can't come in to the work for a couple of weeks, but you can't ask them not to go because they may have a very legitimate personal reason for going to that place. Another question that I have been getting is, can we ask people to take their temperature? Now you're starting to get into kind of a bit of a gray area. Employers with 15 or more employees are covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it could be interpreted that having an employee of your company or you taking temperatures of your staff, that could be considered a medical examination, and that's prohibited by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you can't take temperatures. You can ask employees to stay at home. You can ask employees to self-quarantine. And as we said before, you can ask them to work from home if possible. So if you are thinking about, even fleetingly, about asking employees to provide medical information, please, please, please give us a call before you take that action. At the end of this video, you're going to see a link, and you'll see it down in the show notes, where you can schedule a quick call with us so that we can have a quick chat about some of the things that you may want to be doing. So what are some of the other potential liabilities for employers in this situation that we're in right now? The most important is probably your OSHA standards, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. Maryland has a state plan approved by OSHA. So under that state plan, there's nothing specific about this particular coronavirus, the COVID-19, nor is there, at least as far as I've been able to find so far, anything specific about influenza type infections or infectious diseases. But OSHA has indicated that there may be a general duty requirement of all employers. So OSHA in the state of Maryland, under the Maryland Occupational Safety and Health Plan, covers all private employers. So it doesn't matter if you have one person or 500 people working for you, it is covered. And under the general duty, you have a general duty to help prevent your employees from getting sick. So if you're in a situation where you have employees who work in very close quarters, in situations where they are going to be in close proximity with each other, you may have a general duty to take steps to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 virus. What those steps look like, there's a variety of things that you can look at. OSHA has some information on their website. The link to that will also be down below. And you can also look up information through a variety of sources at the health.maryland.gov, which is the Maryland Health Department's website. So think about things like having lots of soap on hand, having at least 60% Purell type hand sanitizers. They've got to be at least 60% in order for them to work to kill the virus. You can have heavy deep cleaning done at your facilities on a regular basis, if not a daily basis. And you can take other steps that are going to be recommended by medical authorities. And I am not a medical authority. Use your common sense. And if necessary, as I said, have people telework when possible, stagger shifts when possible. And if necessary, you may have to close down for a little while. So the final question that has come up only once so far, but I think is an important question. What can an employer do if the employer is open and the employee refuses to come to work? Under OSHA law, an employee can only refuse to come to work if there is an imminent threat of physical harm to the employee. And by imminent, they usually mean immediate death or serious bodily injury. And it's unlikely that an infectious disease would be considered an imminent threat. So technically, If the employee doesn't come to work and they cite their fear of contracting COVID-19, in theory, you could discipline them. Is that a wise idea? Probably not. I'll be honest with you, it's probably not a wise idea. So you may want to think about ways to be flexible with your sick and time off policy, your paid time off policy. As a final note, I want to say this. I am very much encouraging employers to start planning right now. If you have not already started doing so, start planning right now for what happens if you have to close. What happens if you have to send your employees home? Have a plan. Think about it. Discuss it. Talk to insurance brokers. Talk to your lawyers. Talk to accountants. Talk to your mentors. Talk to your colleagues. Think about ways in which you can prepare for a potential closing, and also how to respond once you are done with the closing and you're ready to come back to work. Right now, I'm in the planning stages of having a webinar where we'll be discussing what to do once the emergency is passed and you're ready to start bringing people back into the workplace and getting busy and back to normal. In the meantime, I highly encourage you to follow reputable sources of news. Check with the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control website, cdc.gov. You can also look up information on, if you're a Maryland employer, at Maryland or at health.maryland.gov. And of course, you can always find links at the governor's office webpage as well. For employers who are not in the state of Maryland, and if you have so far avoided states of emergency like this, consider yourself lucky, but please start planning now. It's coming, I promise you. There's going to be some sort of emergency action and you're going to have to be prepared. In the meantime, if you want to set up a brief call, you can use our scheduling app. You can see it down below. And if I can figure out how to do it, you'll see it somewhere up here as well. In the meantime, stay safe, be smart, be practical, and I will speak to everyone later. Bye-bye.